The wind never stopped crying out in Sycamore Valley. Dust whipped through the cracked boards of Elijah Granger's porch, collecting in small piles like the land itself was trying to sneak into his home and remind him of what he'd lost. Once, his ranch had been 500 acres of grass thick enough to swallow a boot. Now it was dead soil, brittle fence posts, and 2 half-starved cows that looked about ready to give up. Elijah was 42, looked 50, and felt 70. His face was as weathered as the land, lined deep with loss and effort. His wife, Sarah, had died 2 winters ago from pneumonia. Too far from a doctor, too broke to pay one even if he had been near. Their only child, little Gracie, hadn't survived the year before that. She was buried beneath the cottonwood tree, the only one left standing near the dry creek bed. People in town said Elijah didn't talk much anymore, that he was dry inside, the kind of man God had forgotten, or maybe just overlooked. But that morning something different stirred in him. He was heading to town not for feed or parts, but to the county auction. He hated those auctions. They weren't like the ones before the crash. Cattle and horses going to the highest bidder with some decency in the air. These were darker now, sharper, like vultures pecking at what's left of people's dignity. The Depression had gutted families. Drought had finished the job. Men sold their homes, women their heirlooms, and sometimes, though everyone swore it, shouldn't be allowed, they sold their children. Elijah heard the whispers at the general store, that there'd be labor lots today, that some families too desperate to feed everyone were offering up their children, mostly teenagers, to work off debt, or, in crueler cases, to be bought outright by those with land and coin. It turned his stomach. But he went. Not because he needed labor, he could barely feed himself, but because something in him couldn't let go of the memory of Gracie's eyes, blue like his wife's, looking up at him with that innocent trust. And he thought, if someone's girl ends up in the wrong hands today, and I could have stopped it. He rode his mule cart into town under a rising sun, the sky choked with dust and sorrow. The auction. The county square was packed. Men, in overalls and felt hats, leaned on wagons, chewing tobacco and bargaining like it was any other day. Elijah stood off to the side, hat low, watching the lots line up behind the podium. Some were boys, tough and angry. Others, girls in hand-me-down dresses, faces stained with dried tears. Then he saw her. 15, maybe 16, thin arms, bare feet, hair like corn silk, though tangled. Her dress hung too big on her frame, cinched with a rope. Her eyes didn't scan the crowd like the others. She looked at the ground, lips pressed tight like she'd swallowed a scream. A man near Elijah chuckled. That one? Gonna go cheap. Ain't strong enough for real labor. Bet she's gone by sundown for less than a bottle of whiskey. Something. Inside, Elijah snapped. The bid. Elijah Granger, the auctioneer called, surprised. Didn't think we'd see you here. I'll take her, Elijah said, voice low but sure. She ain't up yet. And you ain't even heard her terms. I said I'll take her. People turned. You got the means? Someone called. You got no wife, no help? Barely got a roof. Elijah reached into his coat, pulled out a folded banknote and a silver locket, Sarah's. This is all I got, he said. Should be worth something. There was a long pause. Then the auctioneer nodded, reluctantly. She's yours, Granger. What's her name? The girl looked up at Elijah for the first time. Her voice cracked as she whispered, May. He tipped his hat. May, you come with me. By sundown. They didn't speak much on the ride back. She sat quietly, eyes wide, glancing sideways at him like a stray pup too used to getting kicked. I ain't gonna hurt you, he said once. Ain't why I took you. I can work, she said quickly. I know how to milk, how to sew, I can clean, That ain't why I took you either. She blinked. Then, why? He hesitated, then said softly, because you shouldn't be sold like cattle. She didn't reply, but for the first time, he saw a tear roll down her cheek. Marriage by moonlight. The law was cruel, and times crueler. The girl couldn't stay unless she was legally bound to him, either by labor contract or marriage. Contracts could be broken, a wife could not be taken. Elijah stood with May under the cottonwood tree, the preacher murmuring words that neither fully heard. It was not love, not romance. It was survival. When asked if she consented, May looked up at Elijah, searching for something in his eyes. He nodded, slow. I ain't never gonna touch you wrong, not now, not ever. This is just so no one can take you away. You understand? She nodded. I understand. And before the sun had fully dipped beneath the horizon, May Granger became his wife in name alone. The house was small, just 3 rooms and too many memories. May sat on the edge of a straw mattress in the spare room, hugging a quilt Elijah had left folded for her. It smelled of cedar and dust. She hadn't cried in front of him, but now that she was alone, the tears came freely. Elijah, meanwhile, stood at the wood stove, stoking the weak fire with dried corn husks. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what he'd done. He hadn't bought a wife. He'd saved a child. That's what he told himself. But the law wouldn't see it that way. Neither would most folks. He was too old to be noble and too poor to be trusted. But he'd seen her face, the quiet kind of terror that don't scream or run, just folds inward and hides behind its eyes. And he couldn't look away. Weeks of winter. May fell into the rhythm of ranch life like someone trying to earn her place. She rose before the sun, swept the floors, boiled water, fed the chickens, even though there were only 4 left. She didn't complain when the wind cut through the cracks or when the food was little more than boiled beans and dry cornbread. And Elijah, true to his word, never entered her room and never laid a hand on her. They spoke more with gestures than words. She'd leave a biscuit by his seat. He'd fix the hole in her boot. Little things that said more than talking ever could. One night, the wind screamed so hard it knocked the shutter loose. Elijah got up to fix it, but May was already at the door, holding it in place with both arms, hair whipping in the wind. You'll catch your death, he said. So will you. They laughed, awkwardly, like strangers who'd forgotten how to laugh, but found it again, briefly. The visit. It was the sheriff who came knocking in February. Granger, he said, tipping his hat, though there was no warmth in it. Got word from someone in town. Said you came back from the auction with a girl, a minor. Elijah stiffened. She's my wife, he said flatly. Sheriff stared. She's what? I married her. Got the preacher's ledger if you want to see. It. The sheriff looked like he wanted to spit. You and I both know what that looks like. Elijah didn't flinch. Then come inside and ask her. She'll tell you herself. The sheriff did. Sat at the small kitchen table with May, who poured him coffee with shaking hands. You married this man willingly? He asked. May looked at Elijah, then back at the sheriff. Her voice was steady. He saved me, and he's never laid a finger on me. There was a long silence. Finally, the sheriff stood. I'll be watching, Granger. Don't make me come back. When he left, Elijah sat down hard. You didn't have to lie, he said quietly. I didn't, May replied. Spring begins to whisper. As the weather warmed, so did their connection. They planted what they could. Beans, onions, a small patch of corn in the only soil that didn't blow away in the wind. May fixed the roof with Elijah, laughing as she lost her balance and landed in the hay. Elijah taught her how to saddle the mule properly, and she surprised him by riding bareback like she'd been born to it. He started calling her kid, and she started calling him old man. Neither meant it cruelly. One night, she brought out the locket he'd used to buy her. "This was hers?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "Sarah. She was beautiful. So was my daughter." May held the locket in her hand, then placed it back in his. "You can keep it," he said. She shook her head. "It's not mine to keep, but thank you for using it on me." Letters and land. By early summer, word came by post, one that Elijah nearly tossed as junk. It was from a federal agency. Someone from town had put in Elijah's name for the government's land rehabilitation program. Seems the state was forgiving debts and offering grants to small ranchers if they'd taken in displaced or orphaned minors. May, it turned out, had been listed on the state registry. The government had marked her as unclaimed, but now she was marked married, homesteading, active. And because of that, because Elijah had taken her in, the government offered them $300 in livestock credit, new seed, and the deed to 200 additional acres of arable land nearby. He stared at the paper, stunned. May looked over his shoulder. "What does it mean?" He swallowed. "It means we can start again." Elijah and May stood at the edge of the newly assigned acreage in late July, the sun hanging low like a promise in the western sky. The land was rough, dry, and overgrown with scrub, but not dead, not like the soil around the old ranch. It had been fallow during the worst years, untouched and untamed, like it had been waiting for someone who still had fight left in them. "This yours now?" May asked, hands on her hips. "Ours," Elijah corrected. She gave him a crooked smile, one she rarely let loose. "You gonna make me shovel it all?" "I thought I'd let you plant it all," he said, straight-faced. They both laughed. It came easier now. A visit to the banker. With the federal grant and a letter from the Department of Agriculture in hand, Elijah walked into the same bank that had tried to seize his old property 2 years before. This time, the manager greeted him with a handshake and a forced grin. "We always believed in you, Granger," he lied. "I didn't come for words. I came for tools, seed, and 3 milk cows, and I got government backing now." The banker's eyes flashed. Well, that changes things. For the first time in years, Elijah walked out of that bank with credit and a plan instead of shame and rejection. A girl with a plow. By August, May was up at dawn, tying her hair back with a strip of cloth and leading the mule with the confidence of someone raised by the land. Elijah watched her from the porch, chewing a straw between his teeth. She was no longer the frightened girl he'd brought home. Her arms had muscle now. Her face had sunburn, freckles, and dirt. But her eyes, those were different. They held pride. One evening, after a long day planting, Elijah handed her a tin plate of cornbread and beans. "You work harder than half the men in this valley." May shrugged. "Hard work's better than being sold." He nodded slowly. "You ever think about leaving someday, when you're older?" She looked at him. "I used to, but not anymore." Rumors and respect. It took a while for folks in Sycamore Valley to change their tune. Some still whispered behind their hands when they saw Elijah and May in town. But as the season turned, and Elijah's new fields turned green, the whispers got quieter. Then came the storm. It was September when the flood hit. The river, dry, for nearly a decade roared back with a vengeance after 3 straight days of rain. Fences washed out, roads disappeared. A family of 6, the Harpers, lost their entire house. Elijah hitched his cart at dawn and loaded blankets, food, and seed he could barely spare. May came up beside him, 2 sacks in hand. Thought we could spare these too. He looked at her, then nodded. They rode into town as others still watched from their porches, afraid to part with anything. Elijah and May didn't hesitate. Word spread fast. Full circle. By the time winter returned, Elijah's fields had yielded enough to carry them through. The Harpers built a new home with help, and people finally stopped seeing May as the bought girl and started seeing her as part of the community. On a quiet December night, May placed a package wrapped in cloth on Elijah's table. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it." Inside was a small, worn book, a journal, handwritten. "I've been writing down everything," she said. "What you taught me, what I saw. I want to remember." Elijah turned a few pages, his rough fingers shaking. "You planning on keeping this for yourself?" She smiled. "No, I was thinking, we pass it down. In case someone else needs reminding that even when everything's gone, kindness still counts for something." He swallowed hard. "You think we're a story worth telling?" May reached over and gently placed the locket, Sarah's locket, on top of the journal. "I think we already are." March brought more than rain. It brought a letter, sealed with the insignia of a school in Austin. May unfolded it with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the page, wide with disbelief. "They accepted me," she whispered. "The teacher training program. Tuition waived. Room and board included." Elijah looked up from the fire. "You applied?" She nodded slowly. "Months ago. Quietly. I wasn't sure I'd be accepted, or if I'd even go." Elijah's heart thudded slow and heavy in his chest. He hadn't thought about what came next. Not really. They had just been surviving, building day by day. Now she had a path, one beyond this ranch. "You should go," he said, voice even. "But what about the land, the animals?" "I managed it before. I'll manage again." She stared at him, eyes shining. "You're not mad?" He shook his head. "Mad? Kid. I didn't save you just to keep you. I saved you so you could live." Punted the farewell. 2 weeks later, the entire town gathered at the little train station to send May off. It wasn't just a farewell. It was recognition. The girl who once arrived barefoot and frightened was leaving with boots on her feet, calluses on her hands, and the respect of a town behind her. Elijah stood back as she hugged the Harpers, the storekeeper's wife, even the sheriff's daughter. Finally, she turned to him. "I don't know how to say thank you," she whispered. He took off his hat, his voice hoarse. "Then don't. Just do what you're meant to do, and write me sometimes if you think of it." May smiled through her tears and surprised him with a hug so tight he had to catch his breath. "I'll write every month. That's a promise." And with that, she boarded the train and was gone. A season alone. Elijah returned to the ranch and fell into silence again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not grief, not loneliness, something gentler. He rose at dawn, mended fences, and planted alone. At night, he'd sit by the fire and read May's journal, the one she left behind for him to add to. She wrote from Austin as promised, every month, her handwriting growing neater, her thoughts deeper. In April, I met a professor who talks like you do, plain but sharp. He says the best teachers are the ones who've lived what they're teaching. You could have been one, if life had been different. In July, we learned about the Dust Bowl today. They call it history now. Funny, I still remember the taste of dirt in my teeth. In October, I missed the sound of that old mule more than I should. City life's loud, but not alive, if that makes sense. Recognition. One autumn morning, a car pulled up Elijah's long dirt drive, a rare sight. A man in a black suit stepped out, holding a notebook and a camera. "Mr. Granger?" Elijah wiped his hands on his jeans. "That's me. I'm from the State Department of Education. I've been interviewing applicants in our rural placement program. One of your references listed you." "Who?" "May Granger. She said you taught her to farm, to read contracts, to survive, and to write. She says the most important thing a teacher ever did for her was not in a classroom." Elijah didn't know what to say. The man continued. "Would you be open to being part of a story we're compiling about mentorship, resilience, community?" Elijah looked out over the land he'd nearly lost, the barn he'd rebuilt, the porch where he still sat watching the sun go down. "I reckon I would. A new kind of harvest." 2 years later, May returned, not alone. She stepped off the train in a pressed skirt and sturdy boots, holding a young boy's hand. "This is Henry," she said, smiling. "He's not mine, but he's been through what I've been through. I'm fostering him. I thought maybe you could help me show him how to start again." Elijah looked at the boy, then back at May. "You know where the extra boots are," he said. "Let's get to work."